owl. Here we go. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the BaZi Gratitude Series. It's Friday, it's 9 o'clock Arizona time. It's that time again. And I'm so super excited because my 13th guest is Angela Williams. And I feel like Angela Williams and I have had a long history already. She is a former feng shui student of mine, but she also has a very diverse and super interesting background, which I cannot wait to share her with all of you. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism and a master's degree in spiritual psychology, which I find to be a very fascinating subject that we cannot wait to explore. She's also spent the last 2 decades working as a senior partner at Felton Willis, which is a professional qualitative market research company for Fortune 500. This is why I like your background, because we've shared similar paths, because you have the corporate-y background, but then you have like this metaphysical, spiritual background. And so I find that super fascinating in terms of merging those two worlds together. You may also be familiar with her name or her face or her work, because Angela is also my right-hand person. She serves as the vice president for the nonprofit that I established a couple years ago, the International Feng Shui Association USA chapter. And she is also a regular contributor for the magazine that I publish called the Feng Shui Journal. Woo! That was hot, Angela.
Wow.
Welcome as my 13th guest.
Yes, thanks. Thanks so much, Jen. It's such a pleasure to be with you today, and yeah, looking forward to our chat.
I actually find this super fascinating because you have been like the main facilitator in my world of feng shui, probably for the past like 2-3 years, obviously with the IFSA. And I think it's such a treat right now that I'm going to facilitate and showcase you for a change. How about that, Am?
Yeah, no, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm in the hot seat. I'm so I'm so used to being the one interviewing and asking the questions that this will be a nice change of pace.
So, heck yeah, we're gonna light
bring it on
fire. So Angela, I want to talk to you a little bit about the spiritual psychology business. And I find that so fascinating because, you know, this whole idea, well, I'll come back to that in a second, but spiritual psychology, it's almost like an oxymoron, you know, of like merging two things together. So in your professional experience, what is spiritual psychology? How do you learn it? And most importantly, how do you apply that in our lives? That's like the big bang question right now.
Right. Well, so psyche actually translates into spirit or soul, whereas psychology is more about the study, the science of the mind and behavior, right? And so it's almost like psychology kind of left out the soul. And what spiritual psychology is it kind of brings those two things together. It is about the care and the development of kind of uncovering or awakening to your authentic self meaning kind of the essence of who you are, which is compassion, which is love, gratitude, joy, kindness, all of those really beautiful energies that are kind of really highly elevated ways of being in the world. So that's a little bit of what spiritual psychology is. Let's see, what was your other question? I think you asked, how do you study this?
How do you study it? And then how do you, that's actually such an interesting concept. I've never heard it explained in that regard, how like the psyche is really the soul, right, of the essence of the person, and the psychology of it is more like everything else except the soul. Would you say like psychology is the mind and the body?
Yeah. And it's interesting because part of, I guess, the magic or the synchronicity for me was coming to the school that I went to, which is the University of Santa Monica out in California. I'll tell you that story first, and then I'll kind of take it from there. But for a very long time, I had been interested in psychology, and I really wanted to go back, get a master's in psychology. And every time I would go and talk with various schools, I would walk away with this feeling. I was like, oh, that's not quite it. It's for me, it wasn't about learning about schizophrenia. It wasn't about watching mice run around, in some kind of a maze. Like that, it was missing the part that for me was really about that soul, that psyche, that spirit. And kind of what happened for me was I was working on a research project, and my client asked if I could come back and facilitate for some work in the future, and I was already booked. So they were like, oh, well, would you mind if we had this girl come in and observe, and she can take it on from there? And I was like, no problem, that would be great. So the girl comes in, and after the session, we were talking, and I was like, oh yeah, so tell me a little bit about yourself. What are you up to? And she's like, well, I just started this master's in spiritual psychology. And it was like this light bulb went off in me. I was like, oh, wait, what? Like, I need to know more. Like, that sounds so interesting. And so she tells me about the school, and I file it away in my brain, and I go on for like another year, right? And I am doing some training in nonviolent communications. And the man who was leading that or facilitating that workshop was just like this phenomenal human being, like just oozed compassion and oozed wisdom. And afterwards, we were talking, and I was like, God, like, how did you get to be this way? Like, you are so remarkable. And he tells me about the school again. Oh, I have a master's in spiritual psychology, and I went to this University of Santa Monica. And I was like, oh my God, no way! I heard about this a year ago, but I wasn't quite ready, right? So I file it in my brain, and a year goes on, and a year goes by, and then one day I'm just sitting in my home office, and it was like electricity through my body just lit me up, and it was like, oh, it's time for you to go now. It's time for you to check this out, right? So that's kind of what got me there. And what I did over the course of 2 years, I would fly out to California once a month for my weekend of classes, and we would have, some lecture on the weekend, and then we did a lot of experiential practice, because I think that's really the core to learning anything, is you have to experience it for it to really be anchored in, and for you to really know it, right? And so it was basically 2 years of doing a lot of what I'll call trios. And trios are where you have somebody who's a facilitator, someone who is the client, and somebody who's a neutral observer, and you're rotating into those three different positions as you learn different techniques. Those techniques may be things like checking for limiting perceptions. Those techniques are, how do you listen with more compassion, or listen with your heart? How do you look at your limiting beliefs that are holding you back, right? So there was a whole range of different skills that we were learning, but all of the skills were always intended to really support that kind of peeling off the layers of your ego and really getting to the heart and essence of who you are. So
That's so amazing, and that is something that I find so super fascinating, because it's also understanding human behavior, how people show up in relationships, how they show up in life and in business. And do you ever apply spiritual psychology in your corporate life, in your
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite stories was, when I was first studying spiritual psychology, I had a research project that I was doing. I do focus groups, and so I had all these people sitting around a table, and we were testing new product ideas. And when you're doing like brainstorming work, one of the killers to brainstorming is having somebody who's incredibly negative, right? Just kills all ideas. And there was a woman in the room who was incredibly negative. And so I'm like, what am I going to do to turn this around? Like, I have some information here that I need to get from my clients, and I've got to find a way in with her. So I just started practicing one of the skills that we had learned at school the previous weekend, which was just, they call it seeing the loving essence, and acknowledging and prizing somebody for kind of who they are. So she's talking and she's complaining about this and that and the other thing. And I just started kind of acknowledging her. I was like, wow, I've been listening to everything you've been saying. Um, I'm so impressed with the abilities that you have, X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden, it's like I could see her light up, and she transformed in that moment. She transformed from somebody who was so incredibly a downer to wanting to then contribute, right? Wanting to help out, wanting to provide her thoughts because I was able to express to her that she was valued, and sometimes it's that simple. People just need to be prized and acknowledged for who they are.
Yeah, I feel like there is so much more depth in this subject matter in terms of communication and, like you said, the nonviolent communication, and just and all of that is really tied in with vulnerability as well, right? When you're able to receive compassion, you feel a little bit more at ease to allow the veil to come down and to allow your heart to really come through and to really show up with a giant open heart. And so I find that super fascinating. I feel like there's so much more that we can explore in that. And when you were talking earlier about how, like, that moment when you were sitting at home and then you felt like this electricity kind of run through the course of your body, and you just know sort of the deepest part of yourself that it was time to move forward in embarking on this journey. I mean, when you think about that in every aspects of our lives, people we know, or even in our own experiences, where we suddenly it just clicks, whether it's the right person that showed up right there or a particular circumstance present itself. We talk about synchronicity now, because today we're talking about the magic of synchronicity. Of course, I always like to get geeky and like, okay, what does synchronicity means? And it's interesting that it actually originated from German psychologist Carl Jung, who basically just described it as events that are meaningful coincidences. And it's like a bunch of random kind of casual relationships, but they're actually meaningfully connected. And then when you apply that sort of to the teachings of BaZi, and you understand BaZi, it's all about sort of the things happen at the right time, at the right place. And so for you, as a spiritual psychologist, as the founder of Bloom for the Soul, you're working with clients, both in the corporate realm and also on I would say more like a spiritual side, people that come to you. Like, how do you yourself first envision synchronicity in your life? And why is that, why intention it plays such a huge role in terms of like when synchronicity does occur?
Yeah. And, I think for me, the times where I've felt that, I'll call it that electric yes, or that energy, and that magic and that synchronicity, I think the things that were happening for me in my life at that time, as I've kind of evaluated it and really kind of studied it a little bit more, there's a few ingredients, right? One, I find that the more that you can just be in acceptance of what is, means that you're not fighting up against things, and when you're not fighting, you have much more access to see a bigger picture of what's happening in the world. And when you can see things and you can see more of what's going on, you can then, I think, get in that flow where synchronicities can occur, right? So there's that element to it. I think it also has a lot to do with attention. It's like, where am I putting my energy, and what am I focusing on? Am I focusing on, the crap, the downers in life, the things that are really hard, or am I putting myself in that space of being appreciative and grateful and seeing the beauty? That woman was a great example. This person who came into my room and was kind of a challenge, right? But I was able to see her beauty, and it shifted everything that was happening in that moment. And so I think there's something about that appreciation and that attention that gets you in that flow. I think it also has a lot to do with your intention, right? It's not only your attention, but it's your intention that you have to see magic in your life. And the more that you put your awareness on that intention and what that could look like for you, meaning having a visual or having a desired outcome, you're much more likely then to kind of almost draw it to you, and then you start to experience that. I think appreciation is also just so big to this whole topic, because the more that you appreciate and the more that you love things, it's almost like they love you back, and it comes back to you. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is just about, non-attachment. And so what that really means for me is, we had the saying when I was at the University of Santa Monica, and Dr. Ron and Mary Holnick, who are the directors of the program, they had the saying, it was that you always say it's either this or something better for the highest good of all concerned, and I really kind of anchored into what that really means, because it's like the universe, God, whoever you want to call it. We each have our own personal um, names for it. It's like it's looking out for all of us, and the more that you can bring your gratitude for every situation that happens to you, not only the things that you consider to be good, but those things that are bad, maybe they're not so bad after all. And it reminds me a lot of the yin and yang symbol, right? Because it's like you've got the light and the dark, but they each have a little bit of the other in them. And
Yeah.
so you have these moments in life that um, you think are really good, and you sometimes find out, well, you know what, maybe that wasn't the best thing for me, right? And other times, something that seemed to be bad ends up being
The best.
just, yeah, a miracle, a blessing that comes to you, right? And so being able to keep in mind those things of, again, acceptance and attention and intention and appreciation and non-attachment, I think gets you in that zone of really creating the magic and the synchronicity in your life.
Yeah, that's wow. That is a lot of goodies right there. I feel like we could seriously do a whole hour just talking about those things. And it sounds so simple, but when a person or a society, or humanity in general is going through this motion, and it's very interesting what you talk about attention. Actually, I don't hear that very often. I think it's more, we hear manifestation and intention, right? But really, attention is like what you said, it's the energy that you decide to channel, to put into
Yeah.
practice or to put into play. And it's really interesting when we talk about the practice of law of attraction. It's like, okay, what are you fueling, right? And so it reminds me so much of Mother Teresa when she was alive, and she made it very clear that she would never participate in an anti-war protest,
Yeah.
because that is anti-war. So that means you're focusing on war. So there is always this endless war. But she said that, but I will participate in a peace rally,
Yeah.
because the intention is peace. And so it's very interesting to sort of elevate our sense of awareness to where our mind goes. And you're talking about higher self. That's very, very sort of common saying, but I think for a lot of people, sometimes it's like, what does that really mean? And when we say that, it's like it's either this or something for the better of the higher good. It's literally partly surrendering and partly trusting that perhaps there's many other things out there that we're not quite seeing yet in our ego mind, or like in our human body, right? And so I love it all. And the big part of that is also, the appreciation. I really love what you said about that, and how that really could tie into gratitude. And, with what's going on in the world right now, we know what's going on in the world right now. There's a lot of attention, right? Attention and intention. And, you brought up the yin and yang. It's the saying of, there is no love without hate. There is no light without darkness. And so everything in life is sort of, there's always the two sides, but they're always constantly weaving in and out, and it's just a cycle. And so I want to ask you about your year of magic. It's been quite the year for you.
Yeah.
And when we all look at 2020, the lessons and the triumphs, the victories, and the everything in between, how would you describe your year? And I'm so curious to hear about all this magical synchronicity that's shown up in your life.
Yeah. So I, like, every year at the beginning of the year, I try to pick one or two words that are going to be my focus. So again, it's putting my attention on to something. And so one year I was like, I want to see more magic in my life. And it turned out to be just such a beautiful period of time in my life. I was living in Key West at the time, and I had just broken up with a boyfriend who I had moved to Key West with, which for many people that could have been, a really dark, terrible time of my life. But I really practiced what I had been learning in spiritual psychology and subsequent workshops I had done since that time, to really reframe the situation and what was going on for me. And so one day I'm going to my acupuncturist, getting a little tune up from him. And we're talking about feng shui. And he happens to have a postcard in his office. And he was like, oh, here, why don't you take this postcard? There's a talk on feng shui that a woman is going to be giving here in a couple of weeks. And so I took the postcard and I was like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to study feng shui. Like, this would be so perfect. What a like self-honoring thing to do for myself after a breakup, right? But I look at the dates and I'm already booked for work at that time. So I'm not going to be in Key West. I'm going to miss this workshop. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is such a bummer. But I, like I do, I file it away. And I end up contacting you, my friend, a couple weeks later to say, hey, I wasn't able to make this workshop in Key West where I live, but do you have anything else coming up? And sure enough, you had a workshop in Scottsdale that I think was going to be happening in like a week or two.
Yes,
and I'm like, okay.
last minute.
It was very last minute. I'm like, okay, I'm there, and so I show up to your workshop and like, talk about a beautiful synchronicity. Not only do I get to meet you, but then there's this woman, Karen, who is from Key West, right? So she had traveled all the way across the country too, living in the same place, this little island of, 25,000 people. She's there in our class and she becomes one of my favorite people in Key West, right? Yes. And so not only do I get to meet you, I get to start to learn about feng shui, but I make this amazing friend in my life as well. Yeah. So it was just a beautiful synchronicity, but it like didn't stop there, right? Like I get home and that whole year was like one thing after the next. I was studying with a shaman for a period of time. And one of the things that had come up during one of our sessions was he was like, I really think you need to learn about aromatherapy. And I was like, okay, because I love to learn everything. So I'm like, all right, that's
your yang fire. She's
right?
yang fire. She wants to do everything.
And so he's giving me some information about learning about aromatherapy, and he's like, all right, I don't know, I'm getting some message about the blue moon. And I'm like, okay, that's so strange, but all right, I'll take it. So I immediately call Karen, right, who I had met in your class. And Karen's like, oh yeah, I'm actually going to be doing a aromatherapy class. You should come. So she sends me this email, and lo and behold, the emails, the workshop is being given by a place called the Blue Moon Aromatherapy Center. I forget.
Unreal.
Unreal, right? And it happens to be on the blue moon that's going on that July, right? So and again, it's looking for these different signs and symbols and just being like, I'm going with it. I'm gonna follow through. I'm gonna do it. Yeah. And when you do, really fun, cool things happen.
Yeah. And I think that is such an important reminder, because there's signs and signals all around us all the time. And I think it's just a matter of being receptive to it, being open to receiving these signs and signals. And that is such a cool story. I know that it's like, oh, that was the beginning of everything in terms of like, bloom for the soul, feng shui, BaZi, and all the things that you kind of picked up along the way. And I'm so grateful for our connection, and you have been one of the most instrumental person in really assisting me in sort of elevating and promoting and bringing feng shui to where it's at today. And it's so exciting to be alongside with you in these creations. And I always tell everybody that Yes, Angela's Yang Fire. She is like a unicorn and she sees all things. She's like the sun. And I love sort of that collaboration because you are sort of this like magical unicorn and you're able to um, shed light, if you will, into a lot of the things that I could be very rigid about, very organized and very particular about. And so I find that such a magical connection. And so I myself, I feel super duper grateful for all the things that you bring forth. And you have so much more to offer and to share to our community, even outside of feng shui. And so I cannot wait to hear you talk more in the coming future, to write more. I'm always like, come on, Angela, let's do this. You can do this. You want to do this? You're going to do this. So,
Yeah.
well, before we close this out, in the spirit of the BaZi Gratitude Series, obviously, I just want to ask you, like, what are the things are you grateful for today? Today,
Oh,
for now.
yeah. I have so much to be grateful for today. I am actually in Germany right now where my boyfriend lives. And we were able to get some paperwork for me to come into the country for a period of time, which, as many of you know, just the difficulties of traveling outside of the country right now have been pretty harsh. So I am so happy to be here. I'm excited that tomorrow we're going to be hanging out with his daughter and carving pumpkins and making, probably cake and cookies, just like
Yes.
having a really fun kind of festive weekend ahead of me. And I've told you this many times, but I am so incredibly grateful for you. You have been an amazing teacher and mentor, and really someone who's been pushing me along the way to keep doing more of kind of the things that are really in my heart. And it's so much of what's in my heart is about bringing greater transformation and elevation for so many people. And I don't know if I would be doing it if it wasn't for people like you. So I thank you so much for that.
Yay. Wow. So much goodies there, Angela. Well, thank you so much for carving out your time away from love to share a little bit of your love and your light with all of us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you learned a little bit more stuff. I want to put up Angela's information here so that if you are curious about how to get in touch with her, to understand her work, or if you're interested in some of the literature that she has contributed in the past, this is kind of like I would say the landing ground to get in touch. She is amazing. If you've ever participated in a convention or a training conference that we have put out, she is such an amazing facilitator, super impressive. And I just feel like we will be hearing more from her. Wink, wink. So thank you, Angela, and enjoy your magical time in Germany. Get all things festive, and thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Angela.
Bye, Jen.